The next day, the 30th, the emperor, instead of letting me rest, awakened me at 7 in the morning to see the garden. Fortunately, in his sleep, he had forgotten Monsieur Jouet's portentous phrases, so there was no question of leaving me at Brussels. The garden is tolerably large and charming. It is planted in the English fashion. There are several buildings and some well-arranged vistas. After lunch, as soon as the emperor had received the deputations, we set off across the garden, at the end of which is the canal on which we were to embark. Here we were joined by the viceroy and the king and queen of Westphalia, who had arrived from Paris to accompany us on the journey. Nothing more beautiful can be imagined than the banks of this canal, and now was the right moment to see it, as all the fruit trees were in blossom. There are many country houses along the left bank. The villages are quite Dutch. No French is spoken, and the dialect of the country is a corrupt German called Plattdeutsch. At a quarter of a league from the castle of Schönberg, one arm of the Seine passes under the canal to rejoin the other, from which it had been separated. The construction by means of which this passage is effected without danger to the canal itself is called Le Trois Trous. It is said to be an admirable piece of work. We went through 4 locks, at each of which we were delayed at least 25 minutes. There is really nothing more tiresome than a canal voyage. It takes over an hour to travel 1 league. Near Vilvoorde is the House of Correction, an immense building intended to accommodate the beggars from the large towns. Such an institution might well be established in every country of Europe. Before entering the lock, which is close to Malines, the high road crosses the canal by a bridge. Malines, on the left bank of the canal, is quite a handsome city. The cathedral is very fine and has a spire 348 feet high. There are a good many industries in this town, of which the most important are tanning and hat making, but Mechlin is most famous for its lace, which is in great demand and made in various qualities. The archbishop was at the door of the cathedral with his clergy. I think he is rather like Tartuffe. Here we begin to see many trading vessels large enough to undertake a voyage to the Indies. Never have I been so much entertained as during this day, when everything was a novelty to me. I had never seen any ships, so it was impossible to make either the Queen of Westphalia or myself take any part in the conversation. We could already hear the dull boom of the cannon from afar, not unlike the noise of thunder, and saw in the distance a great many masts which were still so far off they appeared like steeple spires. Finally, 4 o'clock, 2 hours after the turn of the tide, we entered the Rupel. A lock closes the entrance to it. On the wharf we found Admiral Mississy, the Minister of Marine, and all the other chief officers, who conducted us by a detestable road to a pretty little gondola, in which we embarked upon the Rupel, which flows into the Scheldt a league farther on, where we saw about 25 gunboats, which are made smaller than a soup of war. They were not in commission on account of the ice, which had been very thick this year. After an hour, we entered the Scheldt, which is very broad at this spot. The weather was magnificent, the sun was setting, and there was a dead calm, but I would gladly have exchanged it for a storm, which I longed to experience. Round a bend in the river, we saw the fine spectacle of 7 battleships, which were not all in commission. Really, there is nothing so grand as one of these vessels. A man of war is 58 feet wide, 23 feet high above the water, and 19 feet below. Some have 60 to 120 guns. The masts are taller than a 3-storied house and carry a quantity of sails and rigging. A small gangway leads down to the captain's room, the council chamber, and several other quite pretty cabins. Still farther down one comes to the place where the sailors sleep, where also the guns are carried. The hospital and galleys for provisions and munitions are below the water level. Lower still one comes to the magazine in which the powder is kept. When the vessel is in commission, there are sometimes as many as 500 sailors, some of them being right up to the masthead. We were saluted by 1,000 guns, the report of which half deafened us, myself in particular, for since the occasion on which my father made me fire an overloaded cannon, any loud noise now makes my ear bleed. We climbed on board. the Charlemagne, but it required courage to accomplish this. The gangway was like a ladder with the steps so far apart that we had to clamber up on our knees. There was wind enough, moreover, to cause very embarrassing accidents. I am certain we exhibited our lives to the gentleman, and I vowed never to climb onto a battleship again without putting on trousers. The Minister Marine might really have been gallant enough to have had a better stairway constructed for us, but one sees in everything that he is but a rough sailor. We were saluted by cheers repeated 3 times. One needs to be very agile in boarding a battleship for the first time to avoid laming oneself. I know I returned to Antwerp with a sprain, 2 lumps on my head, and a gown covered with tar. The Scheldt here is half a league wide. I had been told a great deal about the disagreeable movement I should experience, but to me, when the weather is calm, there is no difference between the sea and a river. Both banks of the Scheldt are lovely. There are many country houses and charming gardens. The setting sun added to the beauty of the landscape. On rounding a little point, we came upon Antwerp, several frigates, 4 men of war, and a vast number of gunboats were lying in the harbor of this fine city. The last rays of the sun were gilding the spires of the city and produced a marvelous effect over the Scheldt. We disembarked at 7 o'clock in the midst of an immense crowd and continued our journey in a carriage to the house of the prefect, where we were indifferently lodged. My room looked on one side upon a little garden, and another upon a court, and the third upon the little narrow and dark street from which rose such terrible exhalations that I was not able to open the windows during the whole of my stay. We dined and then went to bed. On the 1st of May, the weather was magnificent. The Emperor went out at break of day to see the fortifications and arranged to meet us for breakfast at the Prefecture Maritime, which is a very fine house. The Emperor made us go there at 8 o'clock. At 1, he had not arrived. What tedium and impatience we felt while waiting for him may readily be imagined. At last we embarked at 2 o'clock to go on board the Empress. Happily this time the gangway was a little better. The Emperor drilled the crew and dismantled the ship, while the King of Westphalia amused himself by climbing up all the masts. The Emperor also put a Dutch frigate under the sail. After that he went on board the Dalmat and the frigate, but I had too vivid a recollection of my 2 bruises of the previous evening to have any desire to accompany him, so I waited for him on the Empress. As on the previous evening, we were saluted by 1,000 cannon. We passed in front of the Pulstuck, but as she was not commissioned, the Emperor did not board her. On returning home, I found 2 rooms on fire. They say this is a sign of good luck. I could have done very well without this sign, for we had a terrible smoke all day. In the evening, the Emperor received the authorities and the ladies of the town, and on the following day, I inspected the rest of the fortifications, returning for lunch.